Foreign Office ministers have revealed that Russia's security service has hacked high-profile politicians and civil servants.
So our reporter, Charlie Peters, great investigative reporter, is here to tell us more.
So we know this morning now, ministers have confirmed that Russia led a sustained hacking operation against high-profile politicians, civil servants and journalists in what ministers have described as an attack on British democracy, a sustained effort by the Russian Federal Security Bureau, which is the sort of successor to the KGB in Moscow. In the details of this attack, they're pretty limited at this stage, but we do know that private correspondence was acquired from politicians and indeed from those working around British democracy, including members of think tanks linked to the British state. In one example, named by Minister Leo Doherty this morning, a group called Star Blizzard, a state-aligned group, so it's allied to the Russian state but not technically a part of it, had acquired private correspondence from a think tank. That was named this morning, and it comes on the back of a wider concern about cyber attacks in the United Kingdom. Earlier this week, Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden urged Britons to be analogue in a digital age. He warned at the National Cybersecurity Centre that we needed to get first aid kits, torches and candles as risks of cyber attacks and power cuts due to critical national infrastructure.
Let's have a listen to what Oliver Dowden said, Charlie.
Let's be clear what's being targeted here. The critical services that government delivers, our public finances, our roads and railways, our schools, our health service, our armed forces, even the heart of central government itself. And of all the vaults that cyber criminals are desperate to crack into, this one contains some of the greatest rewards. And that's why we see so many attempts to breach our digital defences. Last year, 40% of the attacks addressed by the National Cybersecurity Centre were against the public sector.
So that was Oliver Dowden there.
Now, 40% against the public sector last year. We also heard last year from the Financial Conduct Authority, who had noticed a significant rise in what are so-called distributed denial of service attacks. This is when a hostile actor, state or non-state, can overwhelm a cyber system by flooding it with information, essentially shutting it down. That was a significant rise. And that reflects, I think, what the ministers are warning this morning, that these cyber attacks aren't just focused on one small part of the British state. They're encompassing a wide range of targets, including, as we've heard this morning from the Deputy Prime Minister, NGOs, think tanks and journalists, not just politicians.
Do we do the same to them?
Well, we can't comment on what the British intelligence services are up to.
We probably do.
And they're always very limited in their information. But we don't know what Moscow briefs its own state departments on this issue. What we do know is what the Deputy Prime Minister is telling us this morning, which is a sustained attack on our critical national infrastructure.
Because we've got GCHQ, the listening centre in Gloucestershire,
sure.
One of the most advanced, politically active operations. I'm sure they're bugging Russian politicians. And if they're not, why aren't they?
Well, GCHQ, in that iconic donut building in Cheltenham, they actually, inside that building is this National Cybersecurity Centre, a significant arm of the British state. Its role, obviously, is to protect national security, but also critical national infrastructure, which is why we're hearing about these attacks, not only on politicians, but also, like we just heard, about rail risks, and also possibly even power cuts, as we heard from Oliver Dowden earlier this week. So it's not just politicians, it's all of us.
I was stunned by that statement from Oliver Dowden to say we should all be stocking up on candles and torches and matches. And I thought...
It takes, because I'm old enough to remember, it
medieval England.
To the 3-day week in the 1970s under Ted Heath's government. You had to have candles because of the power cuts.
Yeah.
But I think it reflects a serious threat that this country is facing. And when people think of conflict and war, they often think, soldiers and tanks on the front line. But so much of what is happening nowadays in conflict, insecurity, is at the so-called sub-threshold level, before bullets are fired and triggers are pulled, all of these actions are taking place. And every day, 24/7, Britain and its allies are engaged in a cyber war against state actors and non-state actors who would wish to do all of us harm.
Well, how vulnerable must we be, though, that a different country could turn off our power?
Well,
I mean, how have we got into a situation where that is a possibility?
Britain is the third most targeted country when it comes to cyber attacks after the US and Ukraine.
Why?
Because we're still seen as a key player around.
Oh, we just want to go back to Rishi Sunak. Christopher Hope is there.
There's reports today in the House of Commons that UK politicians were hacked by Russia, FSB. Were you hacked by the FSB?
No, look, so on the second one, there are a range of protections that both parliamentarians and ministers have and advice that they follow, and they get support from the National Cyber Centre and all those things, and I'm pretty confident in the protections that I have. On your first question, look at the results. So you've been over in Calais, you've been over in France. Well, the number of people crossing from France to the UK this year is down by a third. Right? That's the simple truth. We've arrested hundreds of people who have helped facilitate those crossings this year. Many of them have already been charged, and they're going to end up going to jail. Right? People that have come illegally are having their bank accounts closed. 22,000 of them have been returned. And by the way, in the rest of Europe, none of that is happening because the numbers are up. They're up by 80% in the Mediterranean. So actually, what we're doing is making a difference. We're disrupting criminal gangs upstream before they get anywhere near Calais in the first place. We're working more closely with the French. For the first time, we have British officers embedded in their patrols. Why? Because I went and struck a good arrangement with the French. Not for reasons of sentimentality, because it's in the British national interest to have that cooperation on those beaches to stop people coming, and that cooperation is working. You would have seen pictures of some of the barriers that were being put in rivers on the way up to the beaches. Right? That's come as a result of that cooperation. Stops people getting there in the first place, and the proof is in the pudding, right? I'm not about talking, I'm about action. The numbers of people crossing from exactly where you were to the UK are down by a third. They quadrupled in the last few years, and they're up everywhere else. So that should tell you, tell me, and tell the country that what we're doing is working. It is making a difference, but we've got to finish the job. That's why this legislation is so important. That's why we've worked so hard on it. I'm absolutely confident that it's the right approach. It's the toughest ever approach. It will close down all the avenues that people have used in the past. And crucially, as I said, it is the only approach. Because going any further, that difference is an inch, but going any further would mean that Rwanda will collapse the scheme, and then we will have nowhere to send anyone to. And that is not a way to get this going. So what everyone should do is support this bill. Crucially, the Labour Party, the question for them is, are they going to support this legislation? Because we want to get it up and running as quickly as possible so we can finish the job, have a deterrent and stop the boats. That's what I'm committed to doing. That's what the team is committed to doing. And we're going to make sure that we see it through. Thank you very much.
Minister doing his press conference, talking about why Tory MPs have to get behind that bill, the vote next Tuesday, big vote. There'll be some Tories will rebel, but it'll go through, but without the Labour Party support.
Well, quite. That was interesting, Charlie, that Christopher Hope there from GB News asked him, did he know if he personally had been hacked? And he kind of brushed it off and said, I'm confident that I have security in place. That means that won't happen to me. I think you've got to be quite careful making such a statement. That could come back and bite him.
Well, the briefing we're hearing this morning from these ministers does suggest that some of these attacks have been successful in some way. We do know, according to the Deputy Prime Minister this morning, that there has been a selective leaking of information. He named one group in particular called Star Blizzard, a state-aligned group in Russia linked to the FSB, that successor to the KGB, leaking information after successfully acquiring it by hacking into the private correspondence of high-profile MPs, civil servants, journalists, and those in NGOs.
I wonder if they've hacked you.
Let's not ask that question. We don't know the names of any of the victims.
I'd love to know if they've hacked Bev Turner's
We don't know the names.
This government was looking at what I was doing online during the pandemic.
We don't know the names of any of the victims so far, but they have said that if you have been targeted, they've been in touch. So if you have had your private correspondence linked, there would have been a tap on the shoulder quite recently.
I can remember a couple of years ago, huge embarrassment because it turned out the Americans had been listening into Angela Merkel's phone calls when she was Chancellor.
The Americans said, well, that's what happens. It's kind of normal, isn't it?
So, I mean, the idea that we're not doing it back to Russia, if they're not, why aren't they?
I think we can conclude with a great degree of security that the United Kingdom is a world leader in intelligence, the intelligence community, especially on signals intelligence.
Yeah.
There's a reason why we're the third most targeted. OK, it's not a mistake.
And Charlie, GCHQ is probably listening to this conversation right now.
Well, I should hope they have GB News on in the
Of course they have.
They do. They do. We know it's always on in the 10 Downing Street canteen anyway. So good morning to everybody working in at 10
Keep
Downing
up the good
Street.
work at number 10. You're only 20 points behind in the polls.